The match flared in his calloused hand, and Evangeline flinched against the brass headboard as if the tiny flame might consume her whole. 6 months married to Montgomery Ashford III, and she'd become a ghost in her own skin. Hollow, obedient, existing but not living. Now this stranger, this rough-hewn cowboy her husband had hired to work the ranch, was circling her bed at midnight, lighting candles one by one. "What are you doing?" Her voice cracked like old porcelain. Silas Cord didn't answer immediately. He touched another wick to life, his shadow dancing enormous against the papered walls of the bedroom. His boots were caked with prairie mud, wholly inappropriate for a lady's chambers. But Montgomery was away in Boston on business, always away on business, and the household staff had retired hours ago. "Your husband paid me to break horses," Silas said finally, his drawl thick as molasses. "But I ain't blind, Mrs. Ashford. You're the one that needs breaking free." Evangeline's breath caught. She'd been bartered like cattle 6 months prior, her father's gambling debts erased in exchange for her hand to Montgomery, a man 3 decades her senior, who collected beautiful things the way children collected stones. She was 19, displayed like fine china, spoken to in the same tone one might use with a house cat. Montgomery touched her twice monthly with clinical efficiency, then returned to his ledgers. "You shouldn't be here." She pulled her nightdress tighter, though it covered her throat to wrists to ankles, white cotton that felt like a burial shroud. Silas lit the 7th candle. "You shouldn't be dying inside that skin." How did he know? Evangeline had perfected her smile, her posture, her empty morning pleasantries. She poured Montgomery's coffee with steady hands, read poetry in the parlor, embroidered pillowcases she'd never sleep on. Perfect. Hollow. Dead. "I saw you yesterday," Silas continued, "standing in the barn while I worked. You were watching the horses run in the corral, and there were tears on your face. Not sad tears, hungry ones." The observation struck her like a physical blow. She had been hungry, starving for something she couldn't name. The horses had moved with such wild freedom, their hooves thundering against packed earth, manes flying. She'd wanted to run with them, to feel her own heartbeat, to remember what desire felt like before it was trained out of her. "My husband would dismiss you for this impertinence. I expect he would." Silas lit 2 more candles. The room glowed now, warm and alive. Nothing like the cold gaslights Montgomery preferred. "But he ain't here, and you asked me a question 3 days ago in the garden. You remember?" Evangeline did remember. She'd been cutting roses, and Silas had been mending fence nearby. She'd asked him what it felt like to be free, to go where he wanted, to answer to no one. He'd looked at her with those storm-gray eyes and said, "Come riding with me sometime, and I'll show you." She'd fled inside like a frightened rabbit. Now he stood at the foot of her bed, 11 candles burning around her like a ritual. "I'm answering that question, Mrs. Ashford. Tonight, if you'll let me, I'm gonna make you feel real again." Evangeline's fingers twisted in the bedsheets, her knuckles white as bone china. "This is madness. You're a ranch hand." "I'm property?" Silas finished, his voice sharp as a blade. "That what you were gonna say?" The word hung between them, ugly and true. She was property, transferred from her father's household to Montgomery's with a signature and a loveless ceremony in the Presbyterian church. Her wedding dress had cost more than most families earned in a year, and she'd felt like a corpse being prepared for viewing. "I can't." But even as she spoke, something stirred beneath her ribs, something that had been dormant so long she'd forgotten its name. Hope, maybe, or rage. Silas moved to the window, drawing back the heavy damask curtains. Moonlight spilled across the floor, silver and wild. "You know what I see when I look at you, Mrs. Ashford? A woman who's forgotten how to breathe. Your husband keeps you in this house like a painting, something pretty to show off at dinner parties. But you ain't a painting. You're flesh and blood and want. You don't know anything about me. I know you watch the horizon like a prisoner watches the door. I know you touch the horses' noses when you think nobody's looking, and they trust you because you're gentle and real. I know 3 nights ago you stood in the garden past midnight in your nightdress, bare feet in the grass, face turned up to the stars like you were praying for escape." Heat flooded Evangeline's cheeks. She'd thought herself alone that night, desperate for something beyond the suffocating walls of Montgomery's mansion. The grass had been cool and alive beneath her feet, and for 5 minutes she'd remembered what it felt like to be a girl who ran through meadows and laughed without permission. "Were you spying on me? I was sleeping in the barn. You walked right past it." Silas turned back to face her, candlelight catching the sharp planes of his face. He was perhaps 25, weathered by sun and work, with dark hair that brushed his collar and a scar through his left eyebrow. Everything Montgomery was not: rough, honest, alive. I didn't spy. I just saw what you were too afraid to say out loud. And what's that? That you're suffocating. That if something don't change, you'll disappear completely. Evangeline felt tears prick her eyes, hot and shameful. She'd cried more in 6 months of marriage than in all her 19 years before. Not loud, dramatic tears. Quiet ones that soaked her pillow after Montgomery left her bed, that fell into her morning coffee, that disappeared into her embroidery. Why do you care? Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Silas was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on truth.
My sister was married off young to a man who treated her like decoration.
I watched her fade year by year until there was nothing left but obedience and silence. She died last winter, not from sickness but from forgetting how to want to live. His hands clenched at his sides. I swore I'd never watch another woman disappear like that without trying to stop it. The confession hung in the candlelit air between them, raw and painful. Evangeline felt it echo in her own chest, the fear that she was disappearing, becoming nothing more than Mrs. Montgomery Ashford III, a title without a soul. What do you want from me? She asked. Nothing you don't want to give. Silas moved closer, stopping at the edge of the carpet, respecting the boundary of her space. But I want to remind you what it feels like to choose something for yourself. Not because your father demanded it or your husband expects it, but because you want it. Choose what? His smile was small, sad, knowing. To feel real again. Evangeline stared at Silas in the flickering candlelight, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild bird. Every lesson in propriety, every rule drilled into her since childhood, screamed that she should call for help, should dismiss this insolent cowboy, should remember her place as Montgomery's wife, but those same rules had built her cage. How? The word escaped before she could stop it, small and desperate. How do I feel real again when everything I am belongs to someone else? Silas exhaled slowly, some tension leaving his shoulders. First, you remember your own name. Not Mrs. Ashford, your real name, the one your mother called you before you learned to be quiet and ornamental. Evangeline. She said it like a foreign word, strange on her tongue. Evangeline Rose Bancroft. Not the Bancroft anymore, she reminded herself bitterly. That girl had died 6 months ago. Evangeline. Silas repeated it, and somehow in his rough drawl it sounded different. Not like property being inventoried, but like something precious. When's the last time somebody asked what you wanted, Evangeline? Not what was proper or expected. What you wanted. The question struck her speechless. Montgomery never asked. He informed her of dinner menus, social engagements, which dress she should wear. Her father had been the same, directing her life like a chess piece until he'd sacrificed her to pay his debts. I don't remember, she admitted, and the truth of it made her chest ache. Then I'm asking now, what do you want right this minute? Evangeline looked around her bedroom, the expensive wallpaper she'd never chosen, the heavy furniture that made the space feel like a mausoleum, the portrait of Montgomery's mother glaring from above the fireplace. Everything oppressive, everything chosen by someone else. I want... She hesitated, unused to speaking desire aloud. I want to leave this room. I want to feel the night air. I want to run until my lungs burn. I want to scream so loud the windows shake. The words tumbled faster now, confession spilling from some locked place inside her. I want to be improper and wild and alive. I want to matter, not just exist. I want... Her voice broke. I want to be more than a beautiful thing he shows his business associates. Silas nodded slowly, and there was approval in his storm-gray eyes. Then get dressed. Not in any of those fancy contraptions. Find something simple. Boots if you have them. Meet me at the kitchen door in 5 minutes. Where are we going? Somewhere you can remember how to breathe. He moved toward the door, but Evangeline's voice stopped him. Why are you risking your position for this, for me? Silas looked back, and in the candlelight she saw something fierce and honest in his expression. Because you deserve to feel alive, Evangeline, and because some things matter more than a job. He touched the brim of his hat. 5 minutes. Then he was gone, his boots quiet on the hallway runner, leaving her alone with 11 burning candles and a choice that felt both terrifying and essential. Evangeline's hands shook as she climbed from the bed. The nightdress pooled around her feet, and for a moment she stood frozen, decades of conditioning warring with the wild hope surging through her veins. Good wives didn't sneak out at midnight. Good wives didn't entertain rough cowboys in their bedrooms. Good wives accepted their circumstances with grace and silence. But good wives, she realized with sudden crystalline clarity, slowly died inside. She moved to her wardrobe, pushing past silk and taffeta until she found a simple day dress in dark blue cotton, the plainest thing she owned. Purchased for a charity visit to the poor district that Montgomery had ultimately canceled. She'd never worn it. There were boots, too. Practical leather ones she'd bought with the vague idea of walking the property. Before she'd learned that ladies didn't walk, they took carriages. Evangeline dressed quickly, her fingers clumsy with unfamiliar buttons after months of having a lady's maid handle everything. She plaited her auburn hair into a simple braid, forgoing pins and ribbons. In the mirror, she looked younger, less polished, more like the girl she'd been before. She blew out the candles one by one, watching smoke curl in the darkness. Then, barefoot despite the boots, she crept down the servants' stairs toward the kitchen, toward whatever freedom Silas was offering, toward the terrifying possibility of feeling real again. The kitchen was dark except for moonlight streaming through the windows, silvering the copper pots hanging from ceiling hooks. Evangeline's bare feet made no sound on the cool flagstones as she slipped through, her boots clutched in one hand. Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain it would wake the cook sleeping in her quarters off the pantry. Silas waited at the back door, a dark shape against the glass. He'd found a canvas jacket somewhere, worn and practical, and he held it out to her without a word. Evangeline took it, grateful. The night beyond the door looked vast and cold and exhilarating. "You came," he said quietly. "I almost didn't." Evangeline pulled on the boots, lacing them with shaking fingers. The leather was stiff and uncomfortable, nothing like her delicate house slippers. She loved them immediately. I sat on the stairs for 2 minutes trying to remember why this was wrong. And I couldn't think of a single reason that mattered more than feeling alive. Silas's smile was like sunrise. "Then let's go before you remember propriety." He opened the door and night air rushed in, cool and sharp with the promise of autumn, carrying scents of prairie grass and distant rain. Evangeline inhaled deeply, filling lungs that had breathed nothing but perfumed parlor air for months. The sky above stretched infinite and star-scattered, impossibly vast after the confining ceilings of Montgomery's house. They moved quickly across the yard, past the formal gardens toward the barn. Evangeline's skirts caught on rose bushes and she didn't care. The grass was damp with dew soaking her hem, and she didn't care. Every step away from the house felt like shedding weight, like remembering how her own legs worked. In the barn, Silas lit a single lantern, keeping the flame low. Horses shifted in their stalls, curious at the midnight disturbance. The smell was rich, hay and leather and animal warmth, and Evangeline breathed it in like perfume. "Can you ride?" Silas asked, moving to a chestnut mare in the nearest stall. "I could once, before Montgomery decided riding was too dangerous, too unfeminine, too likely to result in windblown hair or flushed cheeks. Before she'd become a decorative object, it's like breathing, you don't forget." Silas saddled the mare with efficient movements, then led her out. "This is Copper. She's gentle, but she's got spirit. She'll take care of you." The mare's dark eyes regarded Evangeline with intelligent curiosity. Evangeline reached out tentatively, touching the soft nose, and Copper whickered approval. Something cracked open in Evangeline's chest. This simple exchange of trust, creature to creature, no performance required. Silas saddled a larger bay gelding for himself, then led both horses outside. The prairie stretched beyond the ranch buildings, rolling and dark under the moon. Somewhere a coyote called, wild and lonesome. Evangeline felt the sound resonate in her bones. "Where are we going?" she asked. "There's a place about 2 miles out, a meadow by the creek. It's far enough from the house that you can scream if you want. Nobody but the stars will hear." Silas cupped his hands to help her mount. Evangeline hesitated, looking back at the house. Her prison, her safety, her death by slow suffocation. Light glowed in one upstairs window where she'd left candles burning. From here it looked almost welcoming, but she knew better. She put her boot in Silas's hands and let him lift her into the saddle. The mare shifted beneath her, warm and alive and powerful. Evangeline gripped the reins and muscle memory flooded back. Her father's estate before the gambling debts, riding through woods as a girl, wind in her hair and laughter on her lips. She'd been 12 the last time she'd felt this free. Silas mounted his gelding in one smooth motion, then looked at her with a question in his eyes. "Ready?" Evangeline nodded, not trusting her voice. Her throat was tight with emotions she'd forbidden herself for months. Fear and excitement and desperate. Fragile hope. "Then let's ride." He urged his horse forward, and Copper followed without prompting. They walked at first, careful and quiet until they'd cleared the ranch grounds. Then Silas looked back at her, grinned wild in the moonlight, and kicked his gelding into a gallop. Evangeline didn't hesitate. She pressed her heels to Copper's sides, and the mare leaped forward like she'd been waiting for permission. Wind slapped Evangeline's face, stole her breath, whipped her braid behind her. The prairie flew beneath pounding hooves, and she leaned forward, trusting the horse, trusting the night, trusting herself. She was alive. God help her, she was alive. The meadow by the creek was a secret place, hidden in a fold of land where cottonwoods grew thick and wild. Water sang over stones, and the grass grew tall enough to brush Evangeline's waist when she dismounted. Her legs trembled, partly from the ride, partly from the enormity of what she'd done. She'd left her husband's house in the dead of night with another man. The scandal would be ruinous if anyone discovered. She couldn't bring herself to care. "How did you find this place?" Evangeline asked, her voice breathless. Her braid had come half undone during the ride, auburn hair escaping in wild tangles around her face. She probably looked disastrous. She felt magnificent. "Been sleeping in the barn since Montgomery hired me 3 weeks ago." Silas tied the horses to a low branch where they could graze and drink. "I explore when I can't sleep. Found this place my second night and I thought—" He paused, turning to face her. "I thought it seemed like the kind of place a person could be honest. No walls, no windows, no one watching?" Evangeline understood immediately. She walked to the creek's edge, kneeling to touch the water. It was cold enough to shock, real enough to anchor. She pressed her wet fingers to her face, felt them slide down her cheeks like the tears she'd been holding back. "I used to know who I was," she said quietly, "before Father lost everything at cards. Before Montgomery bought me like one of his racehorses. I had dreams, ridiculous, impossible dreams. I wanted to study medicine in Boston. Can you imagine? A woman physician." She laughed, bitter and broken. "My father laughed too when I told him. Said I'd marry well and be grateful for it. What happened to those dreams?" Silas asked, coming to stand beside her. "I buried them." Evangeline stared at her reflection in the dark water. She barely recognized the woman looking back. Too pale, too refined, all the wildness trained out of her. "I buried everything that made me Evangeline and became Mrs. Ashford, the perfect wife, the beautiful ornament, the thing he shows at parties to prove his wealth and good taste. Does he hurt you?" The question was carefully neutral, but she heard steel beneath it, not with his hands. Evangeline stood, wrapping her arms around herself. "He's never struck me, never raised his voice. He's just absent. Present in body twice monthly to fulfill his marital obligations, but absent in every way that matters. I could disappear tomorrow, and I think he'd only notice if it inconvenienced his social calendar." Silas was quiet for a long moment, the only sounds the creek's babble and horses tearing grass. Then, "My sister's name was Ruth. She married at 17 to a banker in Kansas City. He treated her like a doll, dressed her up, showed her off, never asked her opinion about anything. She wrote me letters the first year, and I could watch her disappearing line by line. The handwriting got smaller, the sentences got shorter. The last letter was 3 lines long. 'I'm fine. Tell Mother I'm fine. Please don't worry.' She died 3 months later. They said it was pneumonia, but I think she just stopped fighting to breathe." Evangeline's hand found his arm, gripping tight. "I'm sorry. I'm sorrier that I didn't do something sooner. That I didn't ride to Kansas City and drag her out of that house, scandal be damned." He turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight his expression was fierce. "That's why I lit those candles tonight, Evangeline. Because I saw you fading the same way and I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again. Call it presumptuous, call it inappropriate, but I won't apologize for trying to remind you that you're alive. Thank you." The words felt inadequate for the enormity of what he'd given her. This stolen night, this remembered freedom, this proof that she still existed beneath the polished surface. "Thank you for seeing me. How could I not?" His voice roughened. "You're the realest thing in that whole godforsaken house." Something shifted between them, a charge in the air like the moment before lightning strikes. Evangeline was suddenly aware of how close they stood, how her hand still gripped his arm, how her heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the ride. She should step back. She was a married woman. This was already scandalous beyond repair. Instead, she stepped closer. Evangeline. Silas started. Warning or question. She couldn't tell. You asked me what I wanted. Her voice came out steady despite her shaking hands. Earlier in my bedroom, you asked what I wanted. I remember. I want to feel real, not like property or decoration or something to be managed. Real. She looked up at him, meeting those storm-gray eyes directly. Make me feel real, Silas, please. Silas's jaw clenched, something warring in his expression. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking. Evangeline's voice strengthened, months of buried want surfacing. I'm asking to be touched like I matter, spoken to like I'm a person, not a possession. I'm asking to feel something, anything other than emptiness. Montgomery touches me like I'm a duty to be performed. He speaks to me like I'm furniture, and I've forgotten. Her voice cracked. I've forgotten what it feels like to be desired rather than owned. Evangeline, you're married. We can't what? Can't acknowledge that I'm dying inside that house? Can't admit that you see it? She laughed, wild and desperate. The marriage is a transaction, Silas. A piece of paper that transferred ownership from my father to Montgomery. There's no love, no partnership, no life in it. Just obligation and emptiness. Silas turned away, dragging a hand through his dark hair. You're asking me to ruin you. I'm already ruined. The words exploded from her, echoing across the meadow. The horses startled and she lowered her voice, but the intensity remained. I'm 19 years old and I'm already a ghost. Montgomery has ruined me in every way that matters. He's taken my autonomy, my dreams, my sense of self. What's left to ruin? Your reputation. Your security. Your future. What future? Evangeline demanded. 50 more years as Mrs. Montgomery Ashford? 50 years of embroidery and empty conversations and being touched twice monthly by a man who sees me as property? That's not a future, Silas. That's a slow death. He faced her again, and she saw the conflict in him. Desire and honor fighting for dominance. I won't take advantage of your desperation. This isn't desperation. It's choice. Evangeline moved closer, emboldened by darkness and distance from her cage. For the first time in 6 months, I'm choosing something for myself. Not because anyone forced me or expected it or arranged it. Because I want it. Because you see me, really see me, and that's the most intimate thing anyone's done in so long. If Montgomery finds out, then let him. The words surprised even her, but once spoken, she felt their truth. Let him rage and divorce me and cast me into the street. At least then I'd be free. At least then I'd be choosing my own destruction rather than accepting the one he's chosen for me. Silas stared at her for a long moment, and Evangeline held his gaze, refusing to look away. She was done with being demure and obedient and acceptable. She was done shrinking to fit spaces others, designed for her. You're asking me to help you burn down your life, he said finally. Asking you to help me remember I have a life to burn. The tension between them was unbearable, every second stretching like pulled glass. Then Silas moved, crossing the distance in 2 strides, and his hands cupped her face with a gentleness that made her gasp. His palms were rough with calluses, warm and real and honest. If we do this, he said, his voice rough as prairie wind, there's no going back. You understand that? I don't want to go back. Montgomery will destroy you if he finds out. Men like him don't let go of their property easily. Then I'll be destroyed. But I'll be destroyed while living, not while pretending to be alive. Silas searched her face like he was reading scripture, looking for certainty, for understanding of consequence. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because his thumb traced her cheekbone, and his expression softened into something tender. You're the bravest woman I've ever met, he murmured. I'm terrified. Bravery ain't the absence of fear, Evangeline. It's acting despite it. Then he kissed her, and Evangeline felt the world tilt. Montgomery's kisses were perfunctory things, brief, closed mouth, clinical. This was different. Silas kissed her like she mattered, like he wanted to memorize the taste of her, like she was something precious rather than owned. His lips were firm and warm, and when they parted slightly, she made a sound she didn't recognize, need and relief and desperate hunger. She pressed closer, fisting her hands in his shirt, and Silas groaned low in his throat. His arms came around her, pulling her against him, and she felt the solid reality of him. Muscle and warmth and want. This was what being desired felt like, she realized. Not duty or obligation, but genuine want. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. "We should stop." "We should," Evangeline agreed, making no move to step back. "This is dangerous, I know. You'll regret it. The only thing I regret is the 6 months I wasted forgetting how to live." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "I'm not asking you to save me, Silas. I'm asking you to remind me I'm worth saving, and then I'll save myself." His smile was slow and sad and beautiful. "You don't need reminding. You're already doing it." They sat by the creek as stars wheeled overhead, talking in the way of people who've broken through the brittle shell of propriety into raw honesty. Evangeline learned that Silas was 26, from a family of horse breeders in Oklahoma Territory, that he'd left home after Ruth's death because he couldn't bear the weight of what he'd failed to prevent. He drifted from ranch to ranch, never staying long, never forming attachments. "Until you," he admitted, skipping stones across the water. "Something about watching you fade made me angry enough to risk this job. My sister died because nobody fought for her. I wasn't going to let it happen again." Evangeline told him about her childhood, the books she'd devoured in her father's library, the secret fascination with medicine that started when the family doctor let her watch him splint a stable boy's broken arm. "I thought I could study, could make something of myself. Then father lost $18,000 in a single night of cards, and suddenly I was the solution to his debts. Montgomery needed a young, beautiful wife to complete his image of success. I needed to save my family from ruin. Simple transaction." "You're not a transaction," Silas said fiercely. "I know that now. Or I'm starting to remember it." She told him things she'd never spoken aloud, how Montgomery inspected her like a horse before dinner parties, correcting her posture, her smile, her conversation topics. How he'd stopped sleeping in her bed entirely after the first 3 months, visiting only for his twice-monthly conjugal rights. How she'd started measuring time in embroidery stitches and empty hours, watching life pass from inside her beautiful cage. "I thought about laudanum," she confessed quietly. "There's a bottle in Montgomery's study for his headaches. I thought about drinking it all, just to stop feeling so empty. But I was too much of a coward." Silas's hand found hers, gripping tight. "That ain't cowardice, Evangeline. That's survival. You're still here, still fighting even when everything in you wants to quit. That's the bravest thing there is." The words broke something in her and tears came, hot and cathartic. Months of suppressed grief pouring out. Silas pulled her against his chest and let her cry, his hand stroking her back, murmuring words she couldn't quite hear but felt in her bones. When the tears finally subsided, she felt hollowed out but cleaner, like a wound that had been festering finally drained. "I can't go back there," she whispered against his shirt. "Not to that house. Not to that life. Then don't." Evangeline pulled back, searching his face. "What?" "Don't go back." Silas said it like it was simple, like she hadn't just suggested the impossible. "Leave with me tonight. We'll ride to the nearest town, catch a train east or west or wherever you want to go. Start over. With what money?" "I have nothing, Silas. Everything I own belongs to Montgomery. I've got $60 saved. It ain't much, but it'll get us far enough to figure things out." He cupped her face again, his expression earnest. "I know I'm asking you to trade one kind of uncertainty for another. I can't promise you comfort or security or anything like what you've had, but I can promise you freedom and respect and a life where you get to choose." Evangeline's heart hammered against her ribs. He was offering escape, real tangible escape, and it terrified her more than staying. At least in Montgomery's house, she knew the shape of her prison. The world beyond was vast and unknown and full of dangers she couldn't name, but it was also full of possibilities. "Montgomery would hunt us," she said. "Men like him don't accept being left. He'd send investigators, lawmen. We'd be fugitives. Maybe. Or maybe he'd decide you ain't worth the scandal. A quiet divorce, a story about incompatibility. Men like Montgomery care about their reputations more than their wives. And if he doesn't? If he finds us?" Silas's expression hardened. "Then we deal with it. Together. But I'd rather face Montgomery's anger as a free woman than waste away in his house." "Wouldn't you?" Evangeline looked back toward where the ranch lay hidden in darkness. She thought of her bedroom with its expensive wallpaper and suffocating emptiness, her closet full of dresses she'd never chosen, the dining room where she sat opposite Montgomery night after night, speaking only when spoken to, the life stretching before her like a desert, barren and endless. Then she looked at Silas, this rough, Honest man who'd risked everything to remind her she was human. Yes, she said, and felt the word reshape her entire future. Yes, I'd rather be free. Silas's smile was sunrise breaking. Then we ride at first light, before the household wakes, before Montgomery returns. We'll head southwest to Tulsa, catch a train from there. Where will we go? Wherever you want. What was that dream you mentioned? Studying medicine? Evangeline laughed, shaky but real. That's impossible. No medical school would accept a woman, especially one with my scandal attached. Maybe. Or maybe the world's bigger than you think. There are women doctors now. I read about them in newspapers. Schools out east that'll train women, hospitals that'll hire them. It won't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever is, could she? Could she really walk away from everything she'd known, pursue a dream she'd thought dead, build a life from nothing but courage and determination? The girl she'd been 6 months ago couldn't have. That girl had been too obedient, too concerned with propriety, too afraid of her father's disapproval and society's judgment. But that girl was gone, suffocated beneath Montgomery's expectations. In her place was someone harder, someone desperate enough to risk everything, someone who'd rather die trying to live than accept slow death through comfort. All right, Evangeline said. At first light we run. They returned to the ranch as the sky lightened from black to deep blue, the stars fading one by one like dying candles. Evangeline's mind raced with impossible plans and terrifying possibilities. She would need to pack, not much. Anything valuable would be missed. Just essentials. But even that felt dangerous. What if the cook woke early? What if Montgomery returned unexpectedly? Pack what you can carry easily, Silas instructed as they unsaddled the horses in the pre-dawn dimness. Nothing fancy. Practical clothes if you have them. Any money you can access. Papers if possible. I'll provision us for the road, food, water, bedrolls. Meet me here in 2 hours just after sunrise. The household should still be quiet. Evangeline nodded, her mouth dry with fear and anticipation. 2 hours until her life changed forever. 2 hours until she either escaped or destroyed herself trying. She slipped back into the house through the kitchen door, listening for any sound of stirring staff. Nothing. The house was silent as a tomb, and she climbed the servants' stairs to her bedroom on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The room looked exactly as she'd left it, bed disturbed, candles burned down to stubs. She could almost convince herself the last few hours had been a dream. But her boots were caked with meadow mud, and her braid was half undone, and she could still taste Silas's kiss on her lips. Real. It had been real. Evangeline worked quickly and quietly, changing into her plainest dress, a simple brown cotton that had been her traveling outfit when she'd first arrived at Montgomery's ranch. She found a worn carpetbag retrice continue in the back of her wardrobe and began filling it with necessities. 2 changes of undergarments, a spare dress, her mother's silver hairbrush, the only thing she owned that had true sentimental value. A shawl. She hesitated over her jewelry box, knowing the pieces inside were worth a small fortune. But everything had been gifts from Montgomery. Taking them would be theft, would give him legal grounds to pursue her. Except, she dug through the velvet compartments until she found it. A small gold locket on a delicate chain, her mother's, given to Evangeline on her 16th birthday, months before her mother's death from consumption. Inside were 2 tiny portraits, her mother and father in happier times before gambling and debt had poisoned everything. This was hers, truly hers, and she clasped it around her neck. She found $23 in household money in her writing desk, funds Montgomery provided for small purchases, incidentals. She'd barely touched it, having no need or freedom to buy anything. She took it all, knowing it was also technically theft, unable to care. Montgomery owed her far more than $23 for 6 months of her life. As gray light strengthened beyond the windows, Evangeline wrote a letter. Her hand shook, but her words were clear. Montgomery, by the time you read this, I will be gone. Do not search for me. Our marriage was a business arrangement that benefited you greatly and destroyed me slowly. I am leaving to save whatever remains of my soul. I have taken nothing but what was mine before our marriage and minimal household funds. Consider it payment for services rendered as your decorative wife. Do not mourn me. You never knew me well enough to mourn. Evangeline, she left the letter on his pillow in the master bedroom he'd long since stopped sharing with her. Then she took her carpetbag, cast one final look around the prison that had been her home, and walked out. The barn smelled of hay and horses and freedom. Silas was already there, 2 horses saddled, supplies lashed behind. He'd changed into clean trail clothes, and his saddlebags bulged with provisions. When he saw her, his expression softened with relief. "Thought you might change your mind," he admitted. "I thought about it." Evangeline set down her bag. "For about 3 seconds. Then I remembered what breathing felt like last night." Silas smiled and moved to secure her carpetbag to Copper's saddle. "We'll ride hard for the first few hours, put distance between us and the ranch. Once we're clear, we can slow down, travel more carefully. With luck, they won't discover you're gone until midday. And then? Then we stay ahead of whatever comes after." Evangeline knew she should be terrified. She was about to become a runaway wife, a scandal, potentially a fugitive if Montgomery chose to pursue legal action. Everything she'd been raised to value, reputation, security, respectability, she was throwing away for an uncertain future with a cowboy she'd known 3 weeks. But when Silas helped her mount Copper, his hands steady and warm on her waist, she felt nothing but certainty. They rode out as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the prairie gold and pink. Evangeline didn't look back at Montgomery's ranch. That life was over. Dead as the girl who'd walked down the church aisle 6 months ago in a dress that cost a fortune. The woman riding toward the rising sun was someone new. Someone who'd chosen freedom over safety, uncertainty over slow suffocation. Someone who'd decided her life was worth fighting for. They rode for 3 hours before stopping to rest the horses. Silas found a sheltered spot near a stream, and they dismounted to water the animals and eat hardtack and dried beef from his supplies. "How you holding up?" Silas asked, watching her with concern. Evangeline realized she was smiling, genuinely smiling, for the first time in months. "I'm exhausted and terrified and exhilarated. I feel like I've been holding my breath underwater and finally broke the surface." "Any regrets?" She thought about Montgomery discovering her letter, the cold fury that would consume him. She thought about the scandal that would erupt, the whispers in parlors, her father's rage. She thought about everything she was leaving behind: comfort, security, the protection of wealth and status. "None," she said firmly. "Whatever happens now, at least it's happening to me by my choice. That's worth everything." Silas pulled something from his saddlebag, a worn newspaper weeks old. "I've been reading about women doctors. There's a medical college in Philadelphia that accepts women students, and one in Boston. It won't be easy. You'll face prejudice, resistance, people telling you it's impossible. But it's possible," Evangeline finished, taking the newspaper with trembling hands. "It's actually possible, if you want it, if you're willing to work for it." Evangeline looked at the newspaper, at the article describing women who'd defied convention to pursue medicine. Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, Dr. Ann Preston, Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler. Women who'd faced mockery and discrimination and had persisted anyway. "I want it," she said. "I want to study, to learn, to do something meaningful with my life. I want to be Dr. Evangeline Bancroft." She paused. "Not Ashford. Never Ashford again. I'm taking back my father's name, the one I had before Montgomery bought me." "Dr. Evangeline Bancroft," Silas repeated, and it sounded like a benediction. "I like it." They mounted again and continued southwest, following the sun toward Tulsa and the train that would carry them east. As they rode, Evangeline felt the weight of 6 months of captivity lifting like morning fog. Her muscles ached from hours in the saddle, her face burned with sun, and uncertainty stretched before her like an uncharted map. She had never felt more alive. They reached Tulsa 3 days later, dusty and exhausted, but free. The town bustled with commerce, cattle buyers and railroad workers, merchants and travelers heading east or west on the great iron roads that connected the continent. Silas sold his horse for $45, keeping only what they could carry on their backs. Copper Evangeline refused to part with. "She carried me to freedom," Evangeline insisted. "I won't abandon her now." So they arranged to board Copper with a livery stable, paying 6 months in advance. "When you're settled," the stableman said, "send word. I'll ship her wherever you need." The train platform teemed with people from all walks of life. Evangeline, in her plain brown dress and wind-burned face, attracted no particular attention. She was nobody here, not Montgomery's decorative wife, not a scandal, not property, just another traveler heading toward uncertain futures. "2 tickets to Philadelphia," Silas told the agent. "Together?" The agent's eyebrow rose, looking between them. "She's my wife," Silas said smoothly. "Mrs. Evangeline Cord." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily that Evangeline almost believed it. On the platform, waiting for the train, she turned to him. "We should actually marry," she said. "Once my divorce comes through." "If it comes through," Silas looked startled. "Evangeline, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to. Not because I need protection or security or someone to take care of me, but because you saw me when I was invisible. You gave me back myself when I'd forgotten who I was. That matters more than any legal document, but—" She took his hand. "I'd like the legal document too, eventually, if you want it." "If I want it?" Silas laughed, rough and disbelieving. "Evangeline, I'd marry you tomorrow if we could. But I've got $60, now $105 to my name. I can't give you the life you're used to. I don't want the life I was used to. That life was killing me." She stepped closer, holding his gaze. "I want a life where I'm a partner, not property. Where I can study and work and choose my own path. Where I'm valued for my mind and spirit, not my face and comportment. Can you give me that?" "That I can promise." "Then that's all I need." The train arrived in a screaming hiss of steam and iron. They boarded with their meager belongings, found seats in a crowded car, and settled in for the long journey east. As the train pulled away from Tulsa, carrying them toward Philadelphia and uncertain futures, Evangeline watched Oklahoma Territory disappear behind them. Somewhere back there, Montgomery was probably tearing apart his house, raging at her betrayal, plotting revenge or quietly arranging a divorce to avoid scandal. Let him. She was beyond his reach now, beyond his control. He could destroy her reputation. She'd already done that herself. He could pursue her legally. She'd face that when it came. But he could no longer destroy her spirit because she'd taken it back. "What are you thinking?" Silas asked, his arm around her shoulders in a gesture both protective and companionable. "That I spent 6 months dying by inches in a beautiful house, and now I'm alive in a crowded train car heading toward a city I've never seen." Evangeline leaned into his warmth. "It's terrifying. And it's perfect." The journey took 5 days. They slept sitting up, ate cheap food at station stops, and talked about everything and nothing. Silas told her about horse breeding, about reading sign on the trail, about the wide-open spaces of Oklahoma Territory. Evangeline told him about the books she'd devoured as a girl, about her fascination with the human body's mysteries, about her dreams of understanding disease and healing. "You'll make a brilliant doctor," Silas said with such conviction that Evangeline almost believed him. Philadelphia appeared like a promise on the 6th day, massive and bustling and anonymous. They found a boarding house in a respectable but modest neighborhood, taking separate rooms to avoid scandal until Evangeline's legal situation clarified. The next morning, Evangeline presented herself at the Woman's Medical College of Pennsylvania, her mother's locket around her neck, Silas's faith in her pocket like a talisman. The dean of admissions was a stern woman in her 50s, Dr. Rachel Porter, who listened to Evangeline's story with inscrutable expression. Evangeline left out the scandal, mentioning only that she'd left an unsuitable marriage and sought to study medicine. "Our program is rigorous," Dr. Porter said. "We admit only the most dedicated students. Many women apply seeking escape from difficult circumstances. Few have the fortitude to complete the course of study." "I understand." Evangeline met her eyes steadily. "I'm not seeking escape, Dr. Porter. I've already escaped. I'm seeking purpose. I've spent months as a decorative object and I nearly lost myself entirely. Medicine isn't a refuge for me. It's a calling I've denied too long. I'll work harder than anyone. I'll face whatever prejudice and difficulty comes. But I need this chance." Dr. Porter studied her for a long moment. Then she opened a drawer and withdrew an application. "Classes begin in January. The tuition is $300 per year plus books and fees. Can you manage that?" $300. Evangeline had $105 between herself and Silas. It might as well have been $3,000. "I'll find a way," she said. "See that you do." Dr. Porter's expression softened slightly. "I was once a young woman with impossible dreams, Miss Bancroft. The world told me women couldn't be physicians. I proved them wrong. If you have half the determination you claim, you'll find your way. Submit your application by December 1st. Evangeline left the college with paper and hope in her hands. $300. She needed $300, and she had 2 months to earn it. She found work at a textile factory, brutal hours for minimal pay. Silas found work at the shipyards, loading cargo, equally grueling. They worked 12-hour days, lived on beans and bread, saved every penny. In the evenings, Evangeline studied anatomy texts borrowed from the library, preparing for entrance examinations. 6 weeks into their Philadelphia life, a letter arrived from Oklahoma Territory. Evangeline opened it with shaking hands. Mrs. Ashford, your abandonment of our marriage was a humiliation I will not soon forget. However, I have no desire for prolonged scandal. I am filing for divorce on grounds of desertion. Do not return to Oklahoma Territory. You are dead to me and mine. Our business is concluded. Montgomery Ashford III. Evangeline read it twice, then handed it to Silas. I'm free, she whispered. Legally, officially free. They married 3 days later in a simple civil ceremony, with 2 factory workers as witnesses. No white dress, no church, no pretense. Just honest vows between 2 people who'd saved each other. I promise to be your partner, Silas said, sliding a simple brass ring onto her finger. To support your dreams, to respect your choices, to love you not as property, but as the remarkable woman you are. I promise the same, Evangeline replied, tears streaming down her face, happy tears this time. To build a life with you, not for you. To be honest, to be present, to choose you every day. When the magistrate pronounced them married, Silas kissed her with the same tender intensity he'd shown that first night by the creek. And Evangeline, Dr. Evangeline Bancroft Cord, she corrected herself, kissed him back, tasting salt and hope and hard-won freedom. They earned the $300 with 1 week to spare. On January 15, 1899, Evangeline began her medical studies, the only woman in a class of 32 students. She faced mockery, condescension, professors who refused to call on her, fellow students who questioned her presence. She graduated 4 years later at the top of her class. Dr. Evangeline Bancroft Cord opened her practice in a working-class neighborhood of Philadelphia, treating factory workers and immigrants and women who couldn't afford fancy physicians. Silas worked alongside her, managing the office, advocating for patients, supporting her with the same steadfast devotion he'd shown that night he lit candles around her bed. They had 3 children over the years, 2 daughters and a son, raised to believe they could choose their own paths, that their worth wasn't measured by their obedience or beauty, but by their courage and compassion. And sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, Evangeline would lie beside Silas and remember the woman she'd been, hollow and dying in a beautiful prison. She'd remember the terror and exhilaration of that midnight ride, the moment she'd chosen uncertainty over suffocation. Thank you, she'd whisper into the darkness. For what? Silas would ask, though he knew. For reminding me I was real. For helping me save myself. You did that all on your own, Evangeline. I just lit the candles. But they both knew the truth, that sometimes salvation came not from grand gestures but from small acts of seeing, of witnessing, of refusing to let someone disappear. That freedom was a choice made in moments of terrifying courage. That being real again meant risking everything for the chance to finally live. And Evangeline Bancroft Cord, physician and wife and mother and survivor, had lived magnificently.